Enosh Family Counseling Center in Bet Shemesh, which I established about 2 years ago. When I wrote this in Hebrew, it was a quarter of an hour. English is a little bit, so I have to be patient. The Enosh Family Counseling Center in Bet Shemesh was established 2 years ago and provides professional counseling for families coping with mental illness. Bet Shemesh has a unique population composition, as most of its population belongs to the Haredi ultra-Orthodox community. It is large, varied community consisting of many subjects, some very extreme religious views, with various religious views. Our family counseling center tries to meet the needs of families belonging to all these ultra-Orthodox sects and groups. The center's staff includes Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox therapists who are culturally sensitive to the unique needs of this sector. One of the main characteristics of ultra-Orthodox society, and I didn't even know you were Jewish, so when I met you, that was a nice surprise, is that it is very closed in order to protect its traditional values without allowing values that are unacceptable to influence it. The ultra-Orthodox, maybe I'll call it Haredi, it's more easier for me. The Haredi community has isolated itself from mainstream secular Israeli society, not only in its religious lifestyle, which involves strict obedience to commandments, but also culturally, by forbidding television, movies, newspapers, internet, etc. In effect, the ultra-Orthodox community has created an isolated subculture within Israeli society. However, despite its ideology of isolation, it is not sufficiently autonomous to completely cut itself from all the general society. The field of mental health, for example, is one of the few areas in which the ultra-Orthodox community has no choice but to interact with professionals who are outsiders. In this brief lecture, I will review a number of issues that we take into account when providing counseling to Haredi families. The first issue is the rabbis and the community. The community is ruled by rabbinic leaders. The rabbis are regarded as the supreme authorities in all religious, public, and personal matters. Certain sects regard their rabbis as divinely inspired and consult them regarding every aspect of their lives, whether large or small. Obedience to the rabbi's instructions is absolute. As a result, a family with a member coping with mental illness will first turn to the rabbi rather than a mental health professional, and will follow the rabbi's instructions. They will go for professional help only with the permission of the rabbi. Nevertheless, despite the fear of the ultra-Orthodox community to go to professional treatment, today there are quite a few ultra-Haredi rabbis and leaders who have more open outlook and encourage their followers to go to professional help. The community to which an ultra-Orthodox family belongs has an enormous influence on its lifestyle, for better and for worse. In the ultra-Orthodox community, caring for one's fellow man is a supreme value. Therefore, they have developed support systems and many charity organizations, which include, for example, providing meals for families after the woman gave birth, lending medical equipment, and so on. All free of charge, but belonging to this society is very demanding. Whereas in modern Western society, the emphasis is on individuality, in ultra-Orthodox society, the individual must adapt himself or herself to the values of the community to which they belong and obey the rabbi. Deviating from the accepted norms may lead to excommunication. Occasionally, a conflict may arise between obligation to the community and one's personal values. For example, I'm treating Rivka, a 34-year-old Haredi woman with 8 children, whose husband suffers from severe mental problems. Rivka is a member of an extreme Hasidic sect. After years of suffering from her husband's abuse toward herself and her children, and after different types of treatment did not improve the husband's condition, Rivka decided to divorce her husband in order to protect herself and her children. Despite the fact that this was a personal decision, the community supported the husband and applied enormous pressure on Rivka to change her mind. The pressure included threats of removing the children from the educational frameworks of the sect, promise of financial help if she reverses her decision, and more. Rivka's treatment focused on several aspects, including broadening her support system so that she would not be facing the community alone. We helped Rivka turn and receive support from various rabbis outside the community. Their support enabled her to continue the process she had begun. On one hand, this example shows the power of the community and the personal, family, and social price to be paid by someone who dares to deviate from the community norms. On the other hand, without the support of the rabbis, Rivka would not have been able to continue to fight to achieve her goal. The second issue is fear of exposure. The stigma and embarrassment that accompanies mental disorders exist in all population groups, including secular ones. But these are much more powerful in the ultra-Orthodox society, as mental disorders can pose a threat to their most basic values, in particular those of marrying and raising a family, which is one of the main goals of every ultra-Orthodox person. Revealing a mental disorder may prevent that individual from marrying and raising a family, since the exposure reduces the number of offers of prospective mates, שידוכים פוטנציאליים, both for himself and for the healthy siblings. Fear of exposure has many implications. I'll talk about two of them. One is avoiding of seeking professional help, for fear that the secret will be revealed. This prevents the person suffering from a mental disease to obtain appropriate treatment. The person needing the professional help and the family generally pay a high price for this fear. The second thing is hiding the disease even from close relatives. The energy invested in keeping the disease a secret from the general society, and more so from the close relatives, adds an additional burden and often blocks the path to rehabilitation. When I talked to one of the psychiatrists who treat Haredi people, he could tell me that somebody could come in and we'll treat him, and the other one is his brother, which none of them know of each other. It's a complete secret, so these things happen. Since fear of exposure is very real fear in ultra-Orthodox society, our counseling service center is very sensitive to this issue and maintains the greatest possible discretion. Ultra-Orthodox clients are not required to fill out forms, and every possible measure is taken to that they will not encounter other clients at the center. When a family finally dares to go for treatment, they often feel great relief that they can finally speak openly about their struggle. In treatment, they learn that they are paying a high price for hiding this issue. The process of accepting the individual who is suffering from the disease begins, as well as exploring the treatment possibilities that will be suitable for him and for them. The third issue is avoiding turning to the establishment. Some parts of the ultra-Orthodox community are not prepared to receive help from the state of Israel and boycott these institutions for ideological reasons. Since the mental health services are given by the state, many mentally ill are unable to take advantage of the services to which they are entitled, such as disability insurance, free rehabilitation services, help in rent, and etc. The fourth and last issue that I want to talk about is the gender separation services and sensitivity to the rules of modesty. In our center, we observe separation of sexes, whereas parent support groups in secular sector are mixed and include both mothers and fathers. The parent support groups in ultra-Orthodox population are separated from mothers and fathers. The staff shows sensitivity towards the ultra-Orthodox population, also in their mode of dress. Staff members dress modestly in accordance with the accepted norms: skirt, long sleeves, head covering, and so on. Modesty is expressed not only in dress, but also in language, in the words used in treatment, in body language, etc. I will now present a case illustration, which I treated. Moshe, which is of course not his name, 31 years old, married with 2 children, is a member of an extreme Hasidic sect, which leads a very conservative lifestyle. Moshe's wife suffers from depression and a personality disorder, and is receiving treatment in the mental health center. Over the past year, her condition has deteriorated. This expressed itself mainly in her relationship with her husband. She spoke to Moshe as little as possible, treated him with scorn and contempt, and made him feel that he was to blame for her condition. Moshe came to the center for treatment on the verge of collapse. None of his attempts to appease his wife were successful. For a year, he has been trying to understand from her what he did that caused her to treat him this way. And he begged her to tell him so he could correct his ways, and she will once more love him, as in the past. The more she refused to talk to him, the greater the guilt he felt. During the course of treatment, he began to understand that he was not responsible for his wife's depression, and that his attempts to appease her only increased her scar towards him, which caused Moshe's mental health to deteriorate. In treatment, he learned to channel his energy to strengthening his independence from his wife, to understand that her attitude to him is due to her problems and not his behavior. Gradually, his self-image improved, independently of his wife's attitude to him. He learned that he was responsible for his own happiness. The treatment lasted a year and ended when he felt he was a new person, strengthened, happier, aware of the problems in his marital relationship, but not responsible for them. He found pleasure and satisfaction in the strengthened relationship with his daughters, and returning to his religious learning. He was in the yeshiva, but he couldn't concentrate. That also was very frustrating for him, and especially from the reduced feeling of guilt. During the course of treatment, there were several issues relating to the fact that Moshe was a member of an extreme ultra-Orthodox Hasidic sect. The first one is me, a female, treating an ultra-Orthodox male. When Moshe turned to our family counseling center, we had no male therapist. Now we have. I asked him how he would feel about me, a female, being his therapist. Moshe consulted with his rabbi and said that he prefers a male therapist, but that there is no halachic problem with a female therapist since she is coming for professional help. But several rules must be observed. First, that he should not be alone with me in a closed room. It's called food. Therefore, our meetings were inside a room in which the door remained slightly open. Secondly, a table separated us in the room, with Moshe talking but not looking directly at me. That was one issue. The second issue was fear of exposure. From the beginning of treatment and until the very end, Moshe was afraid that someone would see him. Our center is situated in a secular community center and not in an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood. On the one hand, this made matters simple for Moshe because of the lesser likelihood that he would be met or seen by a member of the synagogue. On the other hand, he was very concerned that he would be observed entering a secular place, and if he would be asked what was he doing there, what would he answer? His fear that someone might see him receiving treatment at Enosh and would deduce that there's a mental problem in the family, and the question, what would he answer, seeing going into there, concerned him to the extent that he could not deal with the main issues that brought him to treatment. In order to decrease his fear, we created a cover story. I discovered that the community center had a room for people who were converting to Judaism. and it contained religious books. This room is right next to us. Contained religious books for teaching them the Jewish religion. I showed him the room, and we arranged that if he's asked, he'll say that he's teaching Bible to converts. This cover story reduced Moshe's fears of being exposed, but his anxiety that he might meet someone who knows him, concerned and troubled to a lesser or greater degree during the entire treatment. The third thing is the preserving the family unit as a supreme value. Immediately at the start of the treatment, it became clear that the relationship between Moshe and his wife was not a normal relationship between a husband and wife, and that his wife does not fulfill the duties expected in ultra-Orthodox circles. The wife is expected, among other things, to raise the children and prepare meals for her husband so that he will be free to invest all of his time in learning Torah. Moshe's wife refused to prepare his food. She refused to have marital relations with him and treated him with scorn rather with respect. All these raised the question of why does Moshe continue to live with her? Moshe stated that despite the fact that they did not have a normal husband-wife relationship, nothing even close to it, and despite all of his suffering, keeping the family unit intact was a supreme value, and he would do anything in order to avoid divorce and breakup of the family. He made it clear that if he were to divorce his wife, his daughters would suffer greatly. It would damage their reputation and their social standing, as divorce is not acceptable in his Hasidic system. Looking at this from a modern Western perspective, or judgmentally, we could say that religion, which forbids him to divorce, is forcing Moshe to live a life of suffering. But in this case, the value of preserving the family unit enabled Moshe to find ways of coping with the situation and to find satisfactions within the family framework. The fourth and last issue is working together with the rabbis. In the ultra-Orthodox sector, the families are usually large. The fact that Moshe had only 2 daughters, aged 8 and 10, is most unusual in these circles. Moshe had to deal with this deviation from the norm, which could not be concealed. What do you say to his girls who ask why the family doesn't have a baby? What do the neighbors think, etc.? At a certain stage, Moshe shared the fact that his wife decided that she wants another child. Moshe struggled with the question of whether, in the present family situation, it would be right to bring another child into the world. Moshe was able to express his ambivalence on the matter. Exploring Moshe's feelings and desires in this regard was done with the knowledge that any decision would require the halachic approval of a rabbi. I had to be culturally sensitive and non-judgmental and understand that unlike modern Western society, which asks whether the matter is right for me, and despite the fact that it is one of the most intimate and personal decisions that a husband and wife make, it is also one of the most important Jewish commandments. And making a decision one way or another could mean interfering in God's plan. This was the source of Moshe's need to receive halachic and not only psychological approval for whatever decision he would make. This is but one of many examples of ultra-Orthodox cases we treat in our center in Church. To include, we realized very quickly that without approval from rabbinic authorities, we would not be able to offer help to ultra-Orthodox families. We invested great effort in establishing ties with rabbis in the Chemish, and we adapted the center to their requirements. We have already received the approval of several ultra-Orthodox rabbis, and they themselves have referred families to us.
Thank you. Any questions for Dalia?
Questions?
So we are short in time and we will have to prolong our day a little bit for half an hour or something like that. I want you to stay and hear everything. People prepare their speak, so please, Dr. Adi and Chef, I will just speak.
It's open. Desconfie.
Well, all I can say really, and I'll try to be brief, is kol hakavod. This is amazing hearing all of the work that you and Enosh do for our consumers. Wanted to show off a little bit and say a word or two in Hebrew, so I'm going to try it. It's ani smicha liyot haaretz od pa'am. Hayiti השנה האחרונה באיספרה conference. I don't know if I succeeded, but you all have worked so hard to speak so beautifully in English. I thought the least I could do was try. Okay, just a word about this. Actually, it really addresses all of the things that you all have been talking about on a very deep and clinical level. This presentation was first, it's a work in progress. I first presented it to a conference of peer advocates and consumers who are providers. So some of it speaks directly to them. I will try to change the language so that it talks about how you would assist consumers. I'm also going to be presenting it in November to a professional conference. So, okay, next. All right. So the topic is the evolution from disability to dignity. And actually, really, what I want to say about the whole presentation is that the goal of it is to demonstrate how reclaiming one's dignity is essential to recovery. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the impact of stigma, all of which you all have addressed quite a bit, and hopefully looking at identifying some tools to assist consumers in coping with management of stigma or stigma and overcoming stigma. So I thought it's best to start out with the definition of dictionary. And that is that one who has dignity is of elevated character and is perceived as being worthy or having self-respect. It's right from the English dictionary. I don't know what a Hebrew dictionary would say, but hopefully the same. So then we're going to contrast that. So what is the definition of stigma? It's directly opposite. It's the attribution of unworthiness, that a person is unworthy, or they are disgraceful or shameful. It has expectations of negative behavior. It also encompasses the expectation of fear. So that's pretty much what stigma is about. Then I'm going to define mental illness. in broad terms, of course. The dictionary definition is characterized by a disorder of the mind or emotions. So the question now is, how can someone who has a disorder of the mind or emotions achieve dignity? Dignity being worthiness, self-worth, elevated character, and self-respect. These are the things that often get in the way of people overcoming the stigma and achieving or reclaiming, I like to say, their sense of dignity. The experience of stigma for mental health consumers. And I'm rushing through some of this because I know we're short of time, but clearly people experience shame, blame. You all talked about secrecy a lot. There's the black sheep of the family. Irving Goffman actually spoke about the courtesy stigma, how the family experiences stigma and isolation and social exclusion. Now, all of these things, these experiences of stigma, they result in stereotypes and obviously in discrimination. What I wanted to go back and just show, you know, what we consider to be the 4 core elements in the recovery of disability, and that being, one of them being hope, having a vision or a goal, empowerment, acting and advocating on your own behalf, responsibility, being free to make choices, and one of the most important is meaningful roles, being a partner, a friend, a spouse, a parent, student, coworker, anything other than being a disabled person or a mental patient. So what we're going to touch on here is some of the barriers to achieving dignity. And clearly, one of them is overcoming fear and shame. And I chose that picture because I got input not only from consumers, but people and clinicians, but even people in my family, someone in my family who had mental illness. And that sense of being burdened by the shame is really very, very powerful. Being invisible. Having a mental disability has the unique challenge in that often it's invisible to the naked eye. It's not like someone else having a disability of blind or being in a wheelchair or being deaf or some other physical disability. In fact, I was, I'm so sorry. What? Yeah. Yes. Okay. We were speaking before, and I was saying I really don't agree with the myth that having a psychiatric disability is the same as any other chronic illness, like diabetes. That's a nice thing that we want to tell ourselves and we want to tell our consumers, but it really isn't true. You know, having diabetes affects the person having diabetes. Having a mental illness affects the families, the siblings, the community, other people. So there's really a very big difference. So often it's the unexpected. So a person is kind of invisible. You're just walking around unless they look like they're completely you know, one shoe on, one shoe off, and dressing in rags. It's the person's unexpected self-expression or communication that alerts others and invites stigma. Overcoming fear. I won't go into what Winston Churchill said, but most people, when first confronted with someone who has a mental illness, may become fearful or uncomfortable and fear the unexpected. Actually, studies have shown that 80% of people are embarrassed by people with mental illness. So if you have someone in your family or even a neighbor or someone you work with, they're embarrassed. About 45% of people, when asked, actually admitted it. I was talking to Dr. Ron Shore the other day from Hebrew University, and we were discussing how even students who become social workers or psychologists and have had mental illness and then reveal that, how they then begin to feel like they're being treated differently, isolated, and set apart. So it's really, the overcoming this fear and embarrassment is really important. Okay, what does stigma mean? Stigma is the negative expectations that the public has of someone with a mental illness. I was talking with someone here earlier about low expectations. You know, we think, we dance around them and say, well, oh, that person can't go here or do this or do that because they have a mental illness. But also people have negative stereotypes. The most common, of course, is that everybody who has a mental illness is violent or potentially violent. And you know, in the media, anytime someone does do something really violent and crazy, the justification is, well, that person was mentally ill and hasn't been treated appropriately. Real stigma. The stigma is very real and very, very powerful. Actually, one of the reasons I also chose this is I'm on the task force in Los Angeles County to combat stigma, so it's something I've been working on for a while. But the stigma of mental illness is real. It exists everywhere in social work, big Knesset, I guess, church, and even among some mental health professionals, which I alluded to before. And I want to say that I run programs very similar to the ones here at Enosh. Some I want to borrow and take home with me because they're so unique. But I have, in addition to a wellness center, I have a client-run center, which is a, you know, like social clubs, etc. here, and completely 100% run by consumer providers. These are staff. They have the same benefits I do, same salaries are commensurate with other people in the agency who are at entry-level jobs. They have all been trained as peer advocates. They're fully employed. And when we started this, originally, some of the other clinical staff were saying, well, they don't have to come to quality improvement meetings, and they don't have to come to management meetings. I was going, well, why not? I mean, there's a coordinator for the program. The coordinator happens to be a person who has a mental illness, but why shouldn't they come? The biggest thing in my agency was our holiday, well, Christmas party, where all the employees, we have over 650 employees now, all the employees are invited. And then there was the question, well, staff drink. How could we invite the consumer providers because the staff are drinking? I said, so what does that have to do with anything? If one of our staff are drinking and gets drunk, we're going to tell them to go leave the party. It doesn't matter whether they happen to have a psychiatric illness or not. So even in what I consider to be very, very positive, proactive programs, I learned, you know, and of course helped develop, it took a long time to develop the culture that it's okay, yes, everyone gets to come to the parties, everybody can drink if they want to, and they shouldn't drink if they drink too much, you know, and it's individual. So even in our own programs, I felt like I've had to work very hard to transform the culture into one that is not stigmatizing. Stigma internalized. Okay, we've probably all heard about internalized stigma. It is the result of experiencing negative expectations from others and results in feelings of shame. Continuing, this too is real and is a byproduct of real stigma. After years of experiencing the looks and fear in others, a person begins to believe that they are less worthy in the eyes of others. I mean, it's just a dynamic that happens, and mental health consumers are extremely sensitive to stigmatizing cues from the social environment. This results in a self-perpetuating cycle of stigmatization and reinforces a lower sense of self-worth. And I have here a little diagram to show the process of self-stigmatization. First, this will start with that arrow. A person perceives the thoughts of others to be negative towards him or her. So what do? You get defensive and you get negative back, and maybe you say some inappropriate things, and voila, the person avoids you and says he's crazy and gets negative towards you. So this is a cycle that has to be interrupted somehow. And of course we do that through, you know, education. Okay, next. Replacing stigma. One of the things that obviously I think that it's clear that Enosh does here is that you're, having a place where you have responsibility and a role, in particular a role that is not defined by having a mental illness. So whatever that role might be. Overcoming stigma. It is a gradual process of sharing with peers, family, clergy, and friends. And by assuming more and more roles in one's life where you are not in the role of a patient or a disabled person. That to me is probably, I repeat it a lot of times because I think it's really essential and core. Rather, the person is a friend, a student, a worker, a community member, a parent, etc. So now we move into the area of what to do about it, combating stigma. And I heard some really good things that all of you do here. And we have a lot to learn from what you do. But obviously educating the public, the clergy, which I know I've had no luck in Los Angeles, especially in terms of rabbis, but we do have an interfaith council. Priests and ministers were easy to come to the table. It was very hard to get rabbis. We did get Reform and Conservative, but could not get Orthodox rabbis. So it's best done gradually, one-on-one. And what we help consumers to understand is that by sharing your history of mental disability and challenges of lived experience, you can assist others in identifying with you or with the person, or remind them of a family member who may have experienced similar things. And then, of course, we get into the issues of, what kind of language do you use? How much do you say when you're disclosing? And I have Dr. Chef Eisenberg's self-disclosure rules. It's a useful tool for self-disclosure is to minimize or encapsulate your story so as not to elicit fear and maintain dignity. In other words, zip it up. You want to tell that you have a mental illness, we don't want to tell all those gory details of how you were dragged through the streets to a hospital and all those nasty things about being, in 5-point restraints. No, you don't want to tell that. You want to try to normalize it. So part of being able to tell your recovery story is being able to share it in a way that other people will be able to identify. I had mental illness, I've been in recovery, I take medication for it, I've been able to achieve blah, 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 blah. And let people identify. Everyone has had somebody in their family, whether it was depression or some other kind of disability. So it's really important not to hear war stories. I know that, in certain groups, there's a bipolar disorder group in the States. It doesn't have anything to do with us, but the thing is there, and a Schizophrenic Anonymous, and people will stand up and say, I'm a schizophrenic, and I've been this, and I've been that, and the other one goes, I have bipolar disorder, and wow, you should have seen what I did with my excessive whatever. No, we don't want that. We want you to be able to tell your story in a way that makes it more normalized. So another useful tool for consumers is to help the person with mental illness who has few role models to begin to identify some positive role models. Normally, consumers are used to being told what to do and when to do it, etc. So the objective is to help the consumer to have a vision or think about who they would like to pattern themselves after. Is it the rabbi, their father, their mother, a friend, someone that they can actually begin to visualize and to identify what are the traits that they admire in others. I like honesty, okay, so that person's going to be honest, or, whatever it is, get them to try to identify role models. Overcoming a sense of inferiority. Another thing that we want to do is help consumers to identify the things that they're good at doing, if it's baseball or whatever, and to discover their core gifts and share them with others. And you know, the core gifts are generally very, very personal, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But clearly, the other thing that's very, it makes it very difficult to overcome the sense of shame and reclaim your dignity is that lack of socialization can be a huge barrier to achieving a sense of worthiness or dignity. So it's hard to get respect, this is what we tell people, it's hard to get respect by isolating and not engaging with other people. So you need to go out there and, you know, start at a social club and then maybe volunteer somewhere in the community or whatever. Identify places and people that you can be a part of and participate in some activity that has nothing to do with your mental illness. And obviously, Enosh speaks for itself with all the activities and social clubs and ways in which you do that. This is an interesting point. I think this is the one. Okay, well, overcoming a loss of dignity. Persons with mental illness often feel, this is very critical, a loss of status compared to others. And individuals may have suffered many losses or lost opportunities due to their interruptions with episodes. These lost opportunities are so key and critical to feeling a sense of belonging and a sense of place and a sense of dignity. It can include work or education, relationships, marriage, or parenthood and career, due to dealing with years of interruptions or mental illness. How many times have you heard, you know, someone or known someone of your consumers or clients who, you know, could have gone on and gotten that master's or that PhD if it were not for the, obviously for their interruptions of their illness. And that's, and not being able to have a family or anything like that, that's really very key. So loss, you know, I'm clinically speaking, as a therapist, if someone asks me to define what I think is one of the most crucial, universal issues in any disorder, it's the sense of loss, whether it be loss of status, loss of money, loss of whatever. It's very important, and it is so here too. So reclaiming losses. The losses may be real, but often the person's lived experience does give them unique gifts, including, and that's what you want to instill in the consumers that you work with, that maybe they don't have that advanced degree, but maybe they have a lot of wisdom or compassion and genuine empathy, courage, and the will or determination to continue to achieve and give of one's experiences to others and be a role model. This leads to hope, self-acceptance, and dignity. And again, here I was talking to peer advocates, but this really does apply to any consumer, that they need to look at their core gifts, and that can include a lot of other things, and that generally is, there is dignity in one's life experience, creativity, your character traits, your artistic talents, your hopes and aspirations. Before I go on to that, actually, I'll talk about that afterwards. This is about achieving dignity, and these are some cognitive things that we try to help people do. One is thought. You know, ridding oneself of the internalized stigma by using positive speech, positive affirmations, and having a can-do attitude. Using person-first language, you know, we all know about that, you know, that's really important. When speaking about your illness or an